Hello, everyone. I'm David Muir, and this is our interview with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. His plea for help from the U.S. and NATO, and what he says he needs most right now. Our conversation with the president of Ukraine comes amid a worsening scene across much of that country. Civilians coming under attack while trying to flee to safety. President Zelenskyy saying Kyiv and other cities are being bombarded. He praises the Ukrainian people's unprecedented courage, saying, "We will endure." President Zelenskyy, who just talked with President Biden again, and we asked Zelenskyy what he signaled, what he's hoping for from the U.S. And right here, Zelenskyy's message to Vladimir Putin. His worries about the safety of the nuclear plants, one of them the largest in Ukraine, the largest in Europe, now in the hands of the Russians. And his message here in English to the American people. Our interview, the president's words, with help from a Ukrainian government translator in the room at the office of the president in Kyiv. Mr. President, thank you so much for joining us. We're aware of the situation around Kyiv right now, the fighting to the north, the fighting to the west. What is the situation right now on the ground there, and how long do you think you can keep the capital of Kyiv?
We are being bombarded not only in the city of Kyiv, not only in the housing sectors, but also in the suburbs of Kyiv. You can't even recognize the way our capital looks right now. The city of Kharkiv, Vinnytsia, Odessa, Zhytomyr, Chernihiv, Mariupol, many cities are being bombed.
I know you're aware of the reality on the ground when you list all of those cities where there is Russian bombardment right now, the Russians closing in. The Pentagon, of course, here in the U.S. believes that about 95% of Russian troops that have been amassed along the Ukrainian border are now inside Ukraine. That would be nearly 150,000 troops. How long can the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian people hold off the Russians?
I'm sure that Ukrainians are prepared to stand against Russia for their entire lives. Even the cities that were occupied by a Russian military, they have seen the response and feedback from ordinary people. These ordinary people didn't have machine guns. This courage is something that is unprecedented, and Russian soldiers don't even have that courage. The problem is that for one soldier of Ukraine, we have 10 Russian soldiers, and for one Ukrainian tank, we have 50 Russian tanks, but we are destroying them, and this difference is, the gap is closing. But the question is, how long can we withstand? Many things depend not just on us. We will endure, and even if they come into all our cities, there will be insurgency, insurgent war, and no one will give away our independence. Today, war is here. Tomorrow, it will be in Lithuania, then in Poland, then in Germany. This is serious. United States is far away, but in recent days, I do feel that United States are closer to us.
Mr. President, I wanted to get your reaction to what the Kremlin announced just a short time ago. They called these conditions to end this war. They said you must change your constitution to give up your wishes to join NATO, that you should recognize Crimea as part of Russia, and that you recognize the independence of those two Russian separatist regions in the east. Are you willing to go along with all three of those conditions? What is your message to Vladimir Putin right now?
First, I'm ready for a dialogue. We're not ready for the capitulation because it's not me. This is about the people who elected me. Regarding NATO, I have cooled down regarding this question a long time ago. After we understood that that NATO is not prepared to accept Ukraine, the alliance is afraid of controversial things and confrontation with Russia. I never wanted to be a country which is begging something on its knees, and we are not going to be that country, and I don't want to be that president.
When the Kremlin says these three conditions to end the war, that you must give up on joining NATO, recognize Crimea as part of Russia, and recognize the independence of those two separatist regions in the east, to Vladimir Putin, who will get this message from you, you say it's a non-starter, not willing to those three conditions right now?
I'm talking about security guarantees. I think that items regarding temporary occupied territories and unrecognized republics that have not been recognized by anyone but Russia, these pseudo republics, but we can discuss and find a compromise on how these territories will live on. What is important to me is how the people in those territories are going to live who want to be part of Ukraine. Who in Ukraine will say that they want to have them in? So the question is more difficult than simply acknowledging them. This is another ultimatum, and we are not prepared for ultimatums. What needs to be done is for President Putin to start talking, start the dialogue, instead of living in the informational bubble without oxygen. I think that's where he is. He is in this bubble, he's getting this information, and you don't know how realistic that information is that he's getting. I think it's a bit like in the smoke and mirror situation.
I know you spoke with President Biden again. I'm curious, what's the most important thing you're asking the president for, asking the U.S. for right now?
I told him that for us, the most important today is the security in the sky. We cannot allow Russia to be active there only because they're bombing us, they are shelling us, they are bombing us, they're sending missiles, helicopters, jet fighters. So a lot of things, but we are not doing this because we don't have the sky. We don't control our sky.
The president and NATO have said no to this no-fly zone because of concerns this could trigger a much wider conflict, a much bigger war than what we're seeing already, because there would have to be a willingness to shoot Russian planes out of the sky. Do you understand that concern?
What do you mean to shoot down Russian planes? If the missile is flying, yesterday, for example, the missile hit the university in the city of Kharkiv and the dormitory, and the same missile hit the tumor pediatric clinic in Kiev. So if this missile is flying, so are you thinking whether to shoot it down or not? I think there is no any other answer but to yes, they need to be shot down. You have to preserve lives. I'm sure that the brave American soldiers who would be shooting it down, knowing that it's flying towards the students, I'm sure that they had no doubt in doing so.
Mr. President, I know that no one questions the horror unfolding in Ukraine right now. What the president has said here, and lawmakers really in both parties, Republicans and Democrats, have stood behind the president on this. The concern about protecting and enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine would then lead to the possibility it would draw the U.S. into a wider war with Russia, that they're simply not willing to do that.
We are a place in Europe, a place of freedom, a zone of freedom. And everyone thinks that we are far away from America or Canada. No, we are this zone of freedom. And when the limits of rights and freedoms are being violated and stepped on, then you have to protect us, because we will come first, you will come second, because the more this beast will eat, he wants more, and more.
Mr. President, you talked about the need for fighter jets. We know the U.S. is reportedly looking at how to supply Russian jets from Poland. You had requested these jets because Ukrainian fighter pilots know how to fly these Russian planes. Has there been any movement on that front?
We asked not only the United States, we asked many other countries. I'm not going to name them. We looked into this question. We know where these Soviet planes are stationed, which countries host them, and we asked these countries. And in many ways, it is the United States, in many ways, who will decide.
Do you believe the president could be doing more to help?
I'm sure that the president can do more. I'm sure he can, and I would like to believe that he's capable of doing that.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said just in the last 24 hours that the U.S. is looking at credible reports that civilians have been intentionally targeted there in Ukraine, saying if so, it would be a war crime. We, of course, have seen these horrific images in these last few hours. Do you believe that Putin is deliberately attacking civilians?
Why would I care? The result is the same. People are dying. The bombardment of the schools and kindergartens, the universities, the dormitory, the bombardment of nuclear power plant without even thinking that Europe may disappear if it really hits the unit. Every minute, every hour, every day, the same things are happening. People are dying.
Do you believe Putin is a war criminal?
I think that all people who came to our land, all people who gave those orders, all soldiers who were shooting, they are all war criminals.
Let me ask you, Mr. President, it's believed the U.S. and the West have offered help to get you out of that country alive if it comes to that. Have they made that offer, and how long will you stay?
Yes, I was offered because there was a loss of information and several special groups who were sent to kill me and my family. I said no, because how can I do this? I'm the citizen of my country, and I'm the elected president of these people.
So you will stay until the end, no matter what that means?
Well, I would like the end to be like in the Hollywood movies, the happy end for our country.
When we come back here, President Zelenskyy and his concerns over the nuclear plants in Ukraine, the largest in Ukraine, the largest in Europe, now in the hands of the Russians. In a moment. I want to ask about Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant. It came under attack in the last week, that massive firefight. I know that it's now in the control of the Russians. The internet has been shut down. The director of the IAEA has called this extremely concerning. There have been reports that workers at the plant have been operating at Russian gunpoint. What do you know about the safety and security of the largest nuclear power plant there in Ukraine and really across Europe?
It was one of the most powerful in the world. There are 6 nuclear units. On that night, it was surrounded by armed vehicles and tanks. And at first, they were bombarding the territory of the NPP. They hit the yard and the building. The people who were managing this power plant died. Not all of them, but also the security personnel. Part of that team, they stayed and they are now inside the station. We instructed very quickly to decommission, to shut down nuclear power units, in simple terms, to make sure that they are not operational. The question is very simple. Letting people into a nuclear plant with machine guns who don't even understand how this is working is not possible. This is why our people will stand until the last minute. So we proposed on that same night, so give us the peacekeepers, and I asked them to support this initiative for the UN peacekeepers to come to all of these nuclear power plants, because this is about security and safety for Europe and for the whole world. And inside we will have technical experts and professionals working. And until this very day, that question has not been addressed.
What I'm hearing from you is that you have complete faith in the Ukrainian workers inside those nuclear power plants, both the largest plant that's been taken over by the Russians and Chernobyl, which, more than a week ago, reports that the workers haven't even changed shifts since the Russians took control there, that you have faith in the workers, but no way of confirming what's really happening inside these nuclear power plants.
They can't even leave that place. They are blocked. If they come out, they will be taken by the terrorists. That's it. So they're just terrorists. They're people stationed there in the tanks with knives. And believe me, these are not nuclear scientists or nuclear physicists. I'm not even sure that they have any education for that matter. But the whole world can wait and think 1 week or 2 or 3 while our people will die there. and these fighters will be able to come in. I think everyone has got the time for that, haven't they?
Mr. President, we heard what Vladimir Putin told the Russian people. He said he is denazifying Ukraine. We know that you're Jewish. You lost family members to the Holocaust. I'm curious, what would you tell Putin about denazifying Ukraine?
I think that denazification in general, in this case, is about destroying the nation. This has started in history many times and ended in a very bad manner. But it ended for some countries in such a way that these countries were afraid of having done this. There were countries who started cleansing the world from one nation or the other, and other nations were then sorry that they didn't interfere, that they didn't defend and didn't protect other nations from this. In the current world, we have different nations, different nationalities, but in general, we have one nation. This is the human nation, nation of people. So denazification is, in this case, is pure Nazism, destroying the nation of Ukraine. The same happened in 1940s with Germany. They were doing denazification of the Jewish people. They're doing the same now, and I'm in shock. I didn't even know that in the current world you can do things like that.
We watched your speech. We watched the address to Europe, and you said, if we will fall, you will fall. What did you mean by that?
I think Ukrainians are protecting the values that are shared by all modern people, not only the young population, but all the people who enjoy their lives. And we have the right for that. We are protecting the values that are shared by everyone, no matter what language you speak or where you live. And we are protecting those values today. And I know that if you allow Russian army to destroy these values, this will be the end, because Ukrainians are bearing those values, and Europeans as well. But it is Ukrainian people who is going through this test. That is why you should help us, because all of our people is the army of Europe now.
What would you like to say to Vladimir Putin right now?
I think he is capable of stopping the war that he started. And even if he doesn't think that he was the one who started, he should know one important thing that cannot deny, that stopping the war is what he's capable of.
For the American people and for the people of the West who have been moved by your resilience and by the bravery of the Ukrainian people, do you have a message for them?
I don't know what to say. Thank you very much. What to say to Americans. I just want you to feel and to understand what does it mean for us freedom. Because always American people, they speak about freedom and they know what is it. And now when you're looking at Ukrainians, I think you feel what does it mean for us. So we are not far from you. We are not far from you. And that's why, Americans, if you see and if you understand how we feel life, how we fight against all the enemies for our freedom, support us. Support us, and not only with words, with concrete, direct steps. Do it, and I think we'll win. Of course, together with all the world.